I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Geir Peterson and Mark Lowcock for their briefings. Making progress in the work of the Constitutional Committee is still a priority for Russia. We believe there's a need to swiftly resume the work of its drafting committee in Geneva. It's important to point out that the Constitutional Committee should be guided by a desire for compromise and constructive cooperation. There should be no foreign interference or imposition of external timeframes. We agree that the fragile inter-Syrian dialogue needs support, in particular by bolstering mutual trust between the Syrian parties regarding the release of detainees. In this regard, we have regret that in their statements, the Secretariat and some of our colleagues who are always making a fuss about this topic are ignoring the Syrian authorities' general amnesty announced on the 2nd of May. We're talking here about quashing or shortening punishment for a broad circle of persons, including military service objectors. This is an important step by Damascus to rebuilding public structures, whose importance UN experts talk about regularly. Over recent months, we frequently have heard from a number of states nasty assessments of the presidential elections that are taking place today in Syria. I'm convinced that these kind of comments will be made during today's meeting as well. In acting thus, our Western colleagues are showing indifference to those Syrians turning out to the polls. The significant interest in the vote can be seen in the long queues in the capitals of a number of countries outside polling stations in Syrian foreign representations. This picture clearly doesn't suit those who want to paint the future of the Syrians in their image. It's got to the point that Germany has completely banned elections from being held there. I'd like to underscore that this step is a violation of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, and it undermines the rights and freedoms of Syrians living abroad. Despite all these obstacles, the elections have taken place in 46 polling stations abroad. Judging from the reports, there have been no major problems either abroad or in Syria. Given this, the decision of the self-proclaimed administration in the northeast of Syria to deny Damascus assistance in conducting elections in the areas under their control is of concern, we'd like to underscore once again that the presidential elections in Syria are being conducted fully in line with the existing constitution of the country and national legislation. They in no way run counter to the provisions of Resolution 2254 of the UN Security Council and other international decisions, the basis of which is respect for the sovereignty of the Syrian Arab Republic. Mr. President, we welcome the start of the vaccination campaign in Syria. As we understand it, the northeast has received about 17,000 doses. This is enough to cover medical staff in the area. We expect the swift provision of appropriate services to the people in the IDP camp across the Euphrates. We trust that the worsening security situation in Al-Hol will not harm the efforts of humanitarian workers, and the COVID vaccines will be administered to the most vulnerable. Given the fuel crisis, however, we are still concerned about the UN logistics work on the ground being successful. We would ask the UN OCHA to keep a close eye and control of this question. Mr. President, we are very worried about the information about serious problems in the work of the Euphrates hydroelectric plant. This was something that Mark Lowcock talked about today, rather. At stake is not just the provision of drinking water to areas of Aleppo, Idlib, and Khaskse, but also the work of local irrigation systems that provide more than 40,000 tons to arable land. Now, there's no need to talk about the importance of providing water for sanitation services during a pandemic, given the ongoing problems in the work of the Aluk plant, on the ongoing problems in providing water to Syria through the Euphrates threatens more than 5 million people in the area with a humanitarian disaster. Mark, last time you, for the first time, mentioned the problems facing humanitarian NGOs working in Syria in terms of trying to conduct bank transactions. As we understand it, the problems persist because they're complex in nature. We would like to get regular information and specific statistics as to where the situation is improving and what is still a stumbling block. We expect this particular subject to be properly addressed in the next report of the Secretary General on the humanitarian situation in Syria. We would also like to use this opportunity to thank the head of the international, the ICRC rather, Mr. Mauer, for yesterday's informal briefing. And also we'd like to thank Mark Lowcock for what he was saying today as well. In the context of Syria, we'd like to underscore the ICRC's view that it's extremely important to rebuild critical infrastructure in Syria. We regret the fact that some donor countries are still ignoring these calls for political reasons. However, we support the ICRC's view that a lack of solutions in this area is likely to lead to an increase in a humanitarian catastrophe, not only in Syria itself, but also in neighboring countries. Mr. President, we are challenged by the indifference of our colleagues regarding deliveries to Idlib from Damascus of humanitarian convoys from the UN, the ICRC, and the Syrian Arab Red Crescent. Given this, we are constantly, despite this, we're constantly got at regarding extending or even expanding the cross-border mechanism. Our Western colleagues are continuing to refrain from evaluating the actions of terrorists who are holding the population of that Syrian region hostage. They are clearly making it obvious that they do not intend to take any steps that would create problems for the fighters holed up in Idlib. The cross-border mechanism is put forth as the only possible solution to the humanitarian problems facing Idlib. This hypocritical presentation of the issue is something that we cannot agree with. We are obviously going to have to take this into consideration when taking a decision on extending or the cross-border mechanism. Mr. President, in conclusion, I would once again like to underscore our willingness to provide Syria with comprehensive assistance. I'd just like to give you a few statistics. The Center for Reconciliation of Warring Sides and Control for IDPs, that center has conducted 2,874 humanitarian operations. The amount of humanitarian provisioned has amounted to 5,000 tons. From the 18th of July 2018, the center's forces in Syria have rebuilt 984 education facilities and 254 medical facilities, almost 500 housing units, and 6 road bridges have been repaired, and almost 2,000 kilometers of roads, highways, and almost 1,500 electricity lines. 266 water supply stations have been got up and running again, and as have more than 14,000 industrial complexes. Currently, work is being conducted in 345 areas in Aleppo, Damascus, Deir el-Zor, Latakia, Hama, Homs, Deraa, al-Suwaida, el-Quneitra, and Raqqa. We would urge all others to follow our example and to assist everyday citizens to return to normal life as soon as possible in their wonderful country, which, despite the blatant interference from countries and the illegitimate sanctions has managed to combat successfully international terrorism. Thank you.
Representative of the Russian Federation for his statement.